Last speaker for this afternoon, Ben Adams. He was another one that's been co-hosting to presenting. You did the course as well, didn't you, back in September, wasn't it?
I did, yeah.
Yes. Ben farms in Oxfordshire, and he's going to talk about his experiences with intercropping. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am a self-proclaimed grant horse, so when the opportunity for free public speaking came up, I jumped at it. And as you'll hear from this presentation, which was grant-funded, these trials. So, it was Andy Howard that originally got me down this route of intercropping. In 2020, started with companion oats with linseed, and then it kind of just progressed to doing all sorts of different things. And then last year, I applied for some funding, and basically went a little bit mad, as you'll find out. So, who's me? I am from Lower Farm, just outside of Bicester, North Oxfordshire. We are combinable cropping, and I am a farmer, and I am a full-time consultant as well. So that's why I know all about grants and love claiming them. We are currently an SFI pilot farm, although we were supposed to come out of the pilot farm at the end of last month, but thanks to the RPA, I cannot submit my 23 application yet. So we are still currently a pilot farm. We do a lot of hay meadows and firewood processing and delivery throughout the winter. And we also have sheeps, not our own anymore, because they are a nightmare, an absolute management nightmare. So we have other people's, which is great fun. I get all the benefits, I get rent, and I don't have to look after the bloody things. Happy days. So these intercropping trials. I went a little bit crazy. I did 9 different plots, as you can see, either in 48-metre or 24-metre strips, just to fit in with tram lines and all the rest of it, make harvest logistics a little bit easier. And these are all the different plots I went through. I wangled the grant money because it was a net zero competition, and these trials were my solution to net zero. It was basically a zero input trials, direct drilling, using legumes to fix nitrogen alongside crops, and this was my solution to sequestering carbon, not using very many inputs, and that's how I wangled the grant money. Well, hey. So, it was sponsored by the School of Sustainable Food and Farming, and all the other sponsors down there. Feel free to take photos, I do not mind. You've got seed rates all the way down the side. So, last year, it was a very wet spring. So as you can see, they didn't get drilled until the 18th and 19th of April, which was quite late. And also you've got on there was different variety mixes. So with the beans, oats, the peas, and the barley, I went with a 3-way variety mix for further, basically, disease resistance. Because I've done it for a few years now, I know it works. And I thought, if I'm not using any inputs on these crops, then, Christ, I'm going to need all the help I can get. I am a conventional farmer. So, full disclosure, all the costs are included. This is basically all the setup costs. So, they were all spring-grown crops after a cover crop. It's got the seeding costs there, the variable costs, and then it's just a pretty bog-standard kind of operational costs at the end. But you can kind of see most of the costs there are the seed costs, because there wasn't a lot else. And buying in a lot of different seeds is both confusing and takes a lot of time. SFI, isn't it brilliant? But all of these trials, importantly, are stackable with all of these options, those top 4 ones currently, and no-till farming, whatever that comes out as, we don't know yet. But I mean, adding £308 a hectare onto your bottom line is really not to be sniffed at. That's a good ton and a half. Well, it's almost 2 tons of wheat now with the price at the moment. So, plot 1. I'm going to try whiz through this as long as possible because I've only got 20 minutes. So, beans, oats, oilseed rape. Highlight, oilseed rape is rubbish. As you can see from the oilseed rape in that crop there, it didn't do very well. Everyone told me that spring oilseed rape wouldn't work, but I don't listen to anyone else. I have to find out for myself. So I found out for myself, spring oilseed rape doesn't work. It might do some years. This year, it didn't. But I thought they're all different sizes. It'll all work well. Separation will be easier at the end of it. Yeah, it was a waste of time. Hate spring oilseed rape. Again, beans oilseed rape was in plot 2. Very minimal cabbage flea beetle pressure, cabbage stem flea beetle pressure on the spring oilseed rape, which was quite interesting. I didn't expect that. But it started well at the start, but then it still didn't grow, and it effectively became, this plot became a mix of beans and thistles. Next up, vetch and oats. This was quite a good plot. It did do quite well. Oats are very easy to grow, very low input. They do take a lot out of the soil. They're brilliant scavengers. If I was doing that again, I would do a lot more vetch, probably 15, 20 kilos. Due to a calibration error on the drill, it was a little bit less than that, but that's the nature of trials. Nothing ever works at 100%. Next up, beans and oats. I know David's not here, but he coined the term boats. Brilliant, worked really well, very easy crop. Don't go too heavy on the oats or they will compete with your beans. But it was noticeable in all the trials that where cereals were included, it had a definite negative effect on the weeds, any weeds, and you could see that dead to the line. Next up, vetch and barley. Very similar to the oats, but as you can see, barley does not really do very well in a no-till, no-input system. It really seemed to suffer from nitrogen mineralization. You can see it looking very yellow. It's kind of all scrawny and curled up. It's not having a great time, to be honest. But I wanted to try it. I wanted to see how it would do. So in that sort of system, oats definitely wins over barley does. Peas and oilseed rape. This did go a little bit better than the beans and oats. It was quite interesting. The peas, when they get up to their 5-foot tall, completely crowded out the oilseed rape. I thought it was going to be an absolute disaster. But as soon as the peas kind of got towards their maturity and started senescing, they kind of nestled down a bit. They didn't go flat, which was good. But then it allowed the oilseed rape to come up later. It was still just as disappointing, the oilseed rape, but it was slightly better. Peas, barley, and mustard. So this was the second three-way crop. It's very definite to see that the barley did have, again, an effect on the weeds. It definitely reduced weed pressure. It was a very low rate, but mustard and peas were absolutely brilliant. As you can see next in this crop together, they just worked really, really well. I was amazed with how easy it was to grow mustard. Christ, it just grew like stink. The peas used it to scaffold as well. Mustard just flowers and flowers and flowers. The amount of beneficials that were in this plot was just unbelievable. You can see there's a nice bee there. Not sure what type of bee it is, someone will be able to tell you. But this plot was pretty much my favourite from start to finish. It grew well at the start, it grew well at the end, and all the way to harvest. It was had some weeds in it, as you would expect, more so than when barley was included in the mix as well. But yeah, that was a favourite. And then the last one was the peas and barley, which is kind of quite a staple mix. A lot of people would take a whole crop off of it. But obviously with all of these trials, they were taken the whole way through to harvest, 0 inputs. So I wanted to see, it was kind of maturity-wise, how they would kind of sync up and whether they would be ready at the same time come harvest. So, how did they do? Did any of them do well? I don't know, it's up to you. But full disclosure on all the costs are in there. All the prices are kind of standardized across the lot. As you can see there for the vetch, what I did for the crops that are effectively as a cover crop or would be used as a cover crop, so example, vetch and mustard, I have given them a price as half of what I would pay if I bought them in for a cover crop mix. So you can see the gross margins on the right-hand side there of the 4 plots in that one field. As you can see, it was a shocking year for beans last year, especially spring beans. They really did not like the drought. If you can see at the bottom, I've also compared it to beans and oats, kind of grown as a farm standard. So this was no scientific trials or whatever. They weren't grown in the same field. It was just an average across the whole farm. But obviously you can see at the bottom, the oats, they did have nitrogen, 80 kilos a hectare of nitrogen, and 30 tons of farmyard manure as well. And they were grown in a conventional system, so you can see they're much increased variable costs, even though they were home saved. And yeah, with the beans as well. So yeah, unfortunately we did these trials in a year when the two break crops we grew on the farm, spring peas and spring oats, performed some of the best that we've ever done for a long while. And it is what it is, but as you can see on the next slide, our peas, they were a phenomenal crop this year, our conventional peas. The barley and beans data has been provided by a neighbour. I'm not just saying that because they were lowest performing, but because we didn't grow them on the farm this year, I just thought it'd be interesting to include those as what a conventional kind of crop grown in the kind of neighbouring vicinity would have done. So you can see there, the five different plots in this field, they performed a lot better, with some fairly respectable gross margins, to be honest, especially for break crops. Beats num 3, that's for sure. But yeah. So just kind of putting everything together, this is the output for each individual crop. So you've got kind of each colour will be one crop. So you've got the individuals, so say the beans, the oats, and the oilseed rape, and then the combined totals. So you can kind of see the outputs. You can see on the left-hand side, they were the kind of farm standard. So you would expect them to be a higher output, and then you would expect the intercrops to kind of make up for that from a lower variable cost perspective. So then these are the margins for each individual plots compared to the farm standard on the left-hand side. The barley and beans were not grown in a no-till situation, but as a strip till with a strip till drill from the neighbour. And then just to compare the margins for each plot, you can see peas and mustard was the favourite from the start, and it performed all the way to the end. It needs to be mentioned that with the beans and oats and the peas and barley, they were used as the headland and basically the balance of the field that wasn't in any 24-metre or 48-metre strips. So there was a bit of a yield penalty, obviously, from the headland, but it is what it is. These aren't scientific trials. These are very much farm trials. But yeah, as you can see, it was very much a good year for growing peas last year. And they didn't compete with the conventionally grown peas. But interestingly, the conventionally grown peas that we did on the farm this year, they didn't receive an in-crop herbicide. They didn't receive any insecticide, fungicide, as is. It was just a desiccant and pod stick. So it wasn't too dissimilar from how they were grown in the intercrop trials. So this is a 3-year trials. So these trials followed a Nova winter cover crop in the spring. They've gone into a winter wheat crop now. As you can see for these two photos, I took these last weekend. You can see that lovely, great big wet patch the whole way through that field on the right. God knows what that's from. We've never figured that out. But there is not really a huge amount of visible difference in that field on the top right. But where there has been a visible difference, I've kind of tried to highlight it with some black marks. I'm not sure whether you can see it from that far away. But between those two black marks was a 48-metre strip where the oats and vetch were. I said that the oats weren't planted as thick as I really wanted to. And so it was almost just pure oats, that plot. And as you can see, oats are a very good scavenger. So there is definitely less green area index on the following week behind that, and I think that just shows that perhaps with some more vetch within that mix, there might not have been that much of an effect. But as you look at it, to the right was the beans and oilseed rape, and there's obviously a lot more, not mineralized nitrogen, but fixed nitrogen left in the soil on that right-hand side. But yeah, those two crops actually look very good when you look at them from the ground, but when you look at them from above, they always look very thin and awful, but I promise you, from the ground, they do look okay. So, the key learnings and the next steps. Separation is 100% the biggest barrier, and it's not easy on farm. We have a 3-screened rotary sieve cleaner that is now 20 plus years old and does not an excellent job, but it does an adequate job, enough for what we need it for. For all of these trials, it took a total of, I think, 32 or 34 hours to separate all the individual grains after harvest. So these will now be used in saved seed for following crops or used in cover crop mixes, for example. But that's really key. We did consider getting a colour sorter out, but when you look at the price of it, I mean, unless you're putting tons and tons through it, like you put 1,000 tons of wheat through it to get ergot out, that makes sense. But when I'm doing smaller trial scales like this and I'm putting through a few tons of a thing at a time and then recalibrating it and then going again, that's never going to be very efficient. So if you were doing it large scale, perhaps would make sense, but it's a real technology. I did see someone that had a MacArthur gilet on earlier, and I spoke to them at Groundswell, and they're really trying to push on with more separation technology. And it's something that needs to go on because intercropping is going to get more and more popular, especially with companion cropping payments. Spring oilseed rape is awful. I think that was the easiest. That was clear from almost the get-go. We had spring beans that were ready to harvest. You'll see in the next slide in about early to mid sort of September time, and the oilseed rape had decided to start flowering again. And it kind of got to the point where I'm not going to wait for all the beans to fall on the floor, so we're just going to have to combine it and sort it out afterwards. Yeah, the cereals, they do definitely help with weed control. That was evidence to the line. You could see looking down the line of the individual plots, you could see that very clearly. But there is a definite balance between having too much cereals in the mix and that then becoming a hindrance and too much competition on your other crop within that. As we showed earlier, the young barley definitely suffers with access to nitrogen, especially in a no-till reduced input scenario. It really didn't like it. It just looked stunted from the get-go and it never really got growing. It never really grew more than about sort of 1.5 foot tall. I think personally there is definitely method in the madness. All of my trials were pretty blasé. I didn't really have a scientific knowledge on what I was doing, why I wanted to do it. I just knew, I had an inkling on this is what I wanted to do. This is what I thought would be best. And then in my third year, when I'm going back in the spring, so spring 25 after the wheat crops, I'm going to change these mixes slightly. And the ones that did better, I will either scale up or alter slightly with seed rates, depending on how they did. But I think the biggest win, especially with intercropping, is number one, spring grown. It makes it a hell of a lot easier, especially with regards to weed control. If you don't have any fancy inter-row hoers or, for example, like tine weeders, for example, and use them as your spring break. But if you can get that extra little niche crop as well as a bonus, especially if you're going to use it in like a game cover mix, a cover crop mix, a legume fallow, or whatever it is, if you can use that as well, it's going to significantly reduce your costs for any following seed crops. So yeah, I said in the third year I'm going to be going back in with less mixes, but the ones that do well. And also plant protection product usage. I'm not a basis advisor. I'm not saying go and spray crops that you shouldn't be spraying, but there are certain chemicals that you could use. So for example, on peas and mustard, Laser Centurion Max, you didn't hear that from me, that would have effect on weeds, but not the two crops that you're growing. So there is options for being cheeky, but I didn't say that. You didn't hear that from me. Potentially understories, particularly in regards to weed suppression, low-lying clovers, that might be something that I feature in year 3. It's something that I'm trying in lots of different crops. And buckwheat, it is indeterminate. It's a massive pain to harvest, but I use it in pretty much every single environmental mix I do on the farm, whether it's cover crop mix, winter bird food mixes, all the rest of it. It would be brilliant if I can get that to grow with another crop, probably spring beans. I don't know. I don't really want to be swathing crops, but that's one thing that I'm going to include in that year 3. Whether it works or not, I don't know. Whether I can get half a ton of it, I don't care. It might help, but we'll see. Yeah, I am around in the panel later. Yeah, just so you can see that. So that was the spring beans in the middle, and you can see the nice green tinge it still had of whatever oilseed rape was there left. But yeah, I'm around all evening. I drink Guinness if you want to hear the real details, by the way. Cheers.